My mother-in-law and I were at the notary's office to sign the papers transferring my late father-in-law's estate into a family trust. While she stepped out to take a phone call, the notary slid a sticky note across the desk and whispered, "Don't sign anything today." I pretended to feel dizzy, asked to reschedule, and drove straight to my parents' house. By the time my mother-in-law got home that evening, everything she thought she'd secured was already unraveling. That morning had started so normally it almost hurts to think about. I'd made coffee, fed our dog, and reminded my husband that we needed to stop for gas on the way. He kissed me on the cheek and said he had a site visit in Mississauga and couldn't make it, that it was fine. His mother knew what she was doing, just follow her lead. I didn't think much of it. After 4 years of marriage, I'd learned that when it came to his family's financial decisions, I was mostly there to sign on the dotted line and smile. My mother-in-law, who everyone called by her first name, even her own kids, had been managing the family's assets since her husband passed 18 months ago. My father-in-law had built a small but profitable property management company over 30 years. 2 rental properties in Oakville, a commercial unit in Hamilton, and a cabin up near Perry Sound that the family used every August. When he died, he left everything to his wife with the understanding, at least what my husband had always told me, that it would eventually be split between him and his sister. My husband and I had put 4 years into that company. Not my name on anything official, no, but my weekends, my evenings, my spreadsheets, my phone calls to plumbers at 11 at night. We'd also taken out a joint line of credit to cover a roof replacement on one of the Oakville properties when the reserve fund came up short. That debt was in both our names. The assets, as I was slowly learning, were not. The notary's office was on a quiet street in Burlington, the kind of place with dark wood paneling and a receptionist who offered you water in a real glass. My mother-in-law had booked the appointment herself and told me the day before, almost as an afterthought, that she needed a witness for some estate paperwork. Nothing complicated, she'd said, just a formality. We sat across from a man in his 50s named Mr. Arsenault. He had reading glasses on a chain around his neck, and a very deliberate way of speaking, the kind of person who chooses each word like he's pulling it off a shelf. He spread several documents in front of us. My mother-in-law had clearly been here before. She knew exactly where to look, what page to open to. She was already uncapping her pen. I was reading the first page when my mother-in-law's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and stood up. "I have to take this, it's the property manager." She walked out into the hallway and the door clicked shut behind her. Mr. Arsenault didn't move for a moment. He looked at the closed door. Then he looked at me. Then he pulled a small square of yellow sticky note paper from under his desk blotter, wrote 4 words, and slid it across to me face down. I turned it over. "Don't sign anything today." Below it, a phone number with a 905 area code. I looked up at him. His face was completely neutral, the professional kind of neutral that takes years to learn. He picked up a pen and began reviewing a document as though nothing had happened, but his eyes, just for a second, flicked toward the stack of papers in front of me. My heart was doing something strange. Not quite pounding, more like it had stopped its regular rhythm and was waiting to find out what came next. I folded the note and put it in my coat pocket. When my mother-in-law came back in, I had my hand pressed to my temple. I told them I was sorry, that I'd been feeling off all morning, that I thought it might be my blood pressure. I'd been having trouble with it lately, and my doctor had warned me about stress. My mother-in-law's expression didn't shift the way a worried person's would. It shifted the way an inconvenienced person's does. "Can we reschedule for next week?" I asked Mr. Arsenault. He was already reaching for his calendar. In the car, my mother-in-law was quiet in a way that felt deliberate. She asked once if I needed to go to a walk-in clinic. I said no, I just needed to lie down. She dropped me at our house, said she had errands, and left. I watched her car turn the corner. Then I got in my own car and drove to my parents' place in Ancaster. My mother was in the backyard when I pulled up. She knew something was wrong before I even got through the gate. Mothers always do. I sat at their kitchen table, and I called the number from the sticky note. Mr. Arsenault picked up on the second ring. He was already on his lunch break, speaking quietly like he was somewhere he didn't want to be overheard. He told me he wasn't supposed to do what he'd done. He could lose his license, but he'd been a notary for 26 years, and there were things he couldn't make himself ignore. He told me that my mother-in-law had been in his office 3 times in the past 2 months. The trust documents we were signing today were the final step in a restructuring that had been underway since February. The 2 Oakville properties in the Hamilton unit had already been transferred into a numbered company. The sole director of that company was not my husband. It was a woman named in the documents as a beneficial owner, someone listed as a business associate of the family. He couldn't tell me her name. He'd already said more than he should, but he told me to pull the corporate registry for the numbered company, that it was public record, and that I should talk to a lawyer before I signed anything ever in connection with that family's estate. I sat in my parents' kitchen for a long time after I hung up. My mother had made tea without asking. She set it in front of me and sat down across the table and didn't say a word, just waited. I told her everything. Then I opened my laptop and went to the Ontario Business Registry. The number company, 2008-47-193 Ontario Inc., had been incorporated in January. 6 weeks after my father-in-law's funeral, the director listed was my mother-in-law. The registered address was the family home in Burlington. But under beneficial ownership disclosures, a second name appeared, Tessa Holbrook. I'd never heard that name in 4 years of marriage. I went to LinkedIn first. Tessa Holbrook, financial consultant, previously employed at a mid-sized property management firm in the GTA. And then I went to Instagram, because that's where people put their real lives when they think no one from the other side is looking. Her account was public. She was in her early 30s, long dark hair, someone who took photos of her coffee in the morning and hiking trails on weekends. Ordinary enough. But I scrolled back 6 months, and there was my mother-in-law at a restaurant, laughing with her arm around this woman, tagged dinner with family. So grateful for this one. And there, 2 weeks later, a photo of a kitchen renovation in progress. The tiles, I recognized the tiles. They were the same backsplash my husband and I had spent an entire Saturday choosing for the Hamilton unit. The comments on the renovation photo were full of heart emojis from my sister-in-law. One of them said, "Can't wait to see it finished. You're going to love living there." Living there. I put my phone face down on the table. My father had come in from his workshop and was reading my face the way he always has, quietly and accurately. He's a retired high school vice principal. He has spent 30 years watching people try to hide what they're actually thinking. "What do you need?" he asked. I told him I needed a family lawyer. That afternoon, he called a woman he knew from his school board days, someone who had since moved into family and estate law. She saw me at 4 o'clock. Her name was Karen, and she had the focused, unhurried manner of someone who had heard variations of this story before and knew exactly which questions mattered. I spread everything on her desk. The sticky note, the screenshots, the corporate registry printout, the joint line of credit agreement my husband and I had signed 2 years ago. She looked through it carefully. Then she told me what I was looking at. The restructuring my mother-in-law had been executing was legal on its face. In Ontario, a surviving spouse can restructure an estate and transfer assets, provided the will grants that authority, which my father-in-law's apparently had. The numbered company was legitimate. What was potentially not legitimate was the joint line of credit. If assets that were used as collateral for that credit line, or that our shared funds had been used to maintain, were now being transferred out of the family's reach while that debt remained in both my husband's and my name, there were arguments to be made. Constructive trust. Unjust enrichment. It wasn't simple, but it wasn't nothing. She also said something that I kept turning over for days afterward. She said, "Your husband sent you to that appointment alone. Either he didn't know what was in those documents, which is possible, or he did know and he sent you anyway." I drove home not knowing which was worse. My husband was already there when I got back. He'd made dinner, which he almost never did on weeknights. He asked how I was feeling, said his mother had called and mentioned I'd been unwell at the notary's. He seemed genuinely concerned. That was the thing about him. He had always seemed genuine. I said I was better. I sat down and ate the pasta he'd made and listened to him talk about the site visit, and I watched his face and I thought about what Karen had said. That night, after he fell asleep, I sat in the spare room with my laptop and went through 4 years of our joint bank statements. We had a shared account for household expenses. I had kept records, the way you do when you've grown up watching your parents' budget carefully and you've absorbed the habit without thinking about it. I cross-referenced dates. The roof repair invoice. The HVAC replacement in the Hamilton unit. The property tax payments we'd covered 1/4 when the management company's account was, according to my husband, temporarily short. In total, our household money had flowed toward those properties in documented, traceable ways over $34,000 in 4 years. Not a fortune, but not nothing. I sent the spreadsheet to Karen at 11:30 at night. She replied the next morning at 7. This is useful. Can you come in Thursday? I kept going back to work, kept making dinner, kept walking the dog. My husband was attentive in the careful way people are when they're either genuinely trying or when they want something to stay calm. I couldn't tell which. I decided it didn't matter. I needed 2 more weeks. My mother-in-law called twice that week to reschedule the notary appointment. I said I was still not well, that my doctor had referred me to a specialist, that I didn't want to rush. She was patient in a way that felt effortful. She brought over soup one afternoon, stood in our kitchen asking about my symptoms with a focused concern I recognized from every difficult conversation we'd ever had. She was a woman who knew how to manage situations. She had been managing this one for months. On the second Friday, my sister-in-law called my husband. I was in the kitchen and I could hear his side of the conversation, the way his voice got low and clipped the way it does when he's trying not to show that something is wrong. When he came in, he said his sister was upset about some paperwork delay. I said I was sorry to hear that. That weekend, I went to my parents' house and my father sat with me while I called Karen and she walked us through what she'd filed. An application for a certificate of pending litigation on the Oakville properties tied to our documented financial contributions. It wouldn't stop the transfer permanently, but it would show up on any title search, which meant my mother-in-law couldn't quietly sell or mortgage those properties without a buyer or lender seeing a flag. Karen had also sent a letter, formal and careful, to my mother-in-law's lawyer outlining our position. I wasn't ready for what happened next. Not emotionally, even though I'd tried to prepare myself. My mother-in-law showed up at our house on a Tuesday evening without calling. My husband let her in. I came downstairs to find her sitting at our kitchen table with her coat still on, holding her purse in her lap the way she does when she's performing composure. She looked at me and said very evenly that she thought we needed to talk. She said that she had only ever tried to protect the family's assets from uncertainty, that estate planning was complicated and she had done what her advisor recommended, that she had always intended for my husband to benefit from the properties in time, that a trust structure was actually more tax efficient, that I was misunderstanding the situation. She said she hoped I hadn't done anything rash. I sat down across from her. I said I had spoken to a lawyer. I said I understood the situation quite well. Her composure cracked, just slightly the way ice does before it goes. This family has given you a great deal, she said. Her voice was controlled, but her hands tightened on her purse. I hope you understand what you're risking. My husband was standing in the doorway. I looked at him. He looked at the floor. I'd like you to leave, I said to her. We can have the rest of this conversation through our lawyers. She stood up. She looked at my husband, waiting for him to say something, to step in, to redirect this. He didn't. That was the moment I understood that whatever he had known or hadn't known, he was not going to stand in the middle of this. He was going to let it happen and see which way it fell. She left. The house was very quiet after the door closed. My husband and I talked until 2 in the morning. He said he hadn't known about Tessa Holbrook. I believed him, partially. I think there are things you choose not to look at closely when looking might cost you something. He had trusted his mother because trusting her was easier than not trusting her. I understood that. I had done the same thing for 4 years. I told him I needed to know if he was going to stand with me or beside her. Not in an ultimatum way. I wasn't asking for a declaration. I was asking because I needed to make decisions and I needed accurate information. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Tell me what you need." That was enough. Not everything, but enough to keep going. The next month was the kind of exhausting that sits in your body. Karen was methodical and calm and very good at her job. My mother-in-law's lawyer made several attempts to negotiate. There were offers, a cash settlement, a revised trust structure that included my husband more explicitly, a reframing of the whole thing as a misunderstanding that had gotten out of hand. Karen and I reviewed each one. We declined each one. My sister-in-law sent several text messages, first to my husband, then directly to me when he stopped responding. They escalated in the way those messages do, from hurt to accusatory to the kind of language that gets screenshotted and forwarded to lawyers. Karen was unsurprised. The mediation happened on a Thursday in March, in a boardroom in downtown Hamilton. My mother-in-law sat across the table from me for the first time since she'd left our kitchen. She looked smaller than I expected. Not defeated, exactly. More like someone who has finally stopped pretending the weather is fine. The settlement was reached in 2 sessions. The certificate of pending litigation would be lifted. In exchange, the Hamilton commercial unit would be transferred into my husband's name free and clear. Our documented $34,000 in contributions to the properties would be repaid. The line of credit would be restructured so that the property-related portion was refinanced against assets that were actually in my husband's name. Tessa Holbrook's name did not come up directly in the mediation. I don't know exactly what she was to my mother-in-law or to the plan. Not entirely. I know what the documents suggested. I know what the Instagram posts looks like. I know that the Hamilton unit was renovated on a timeline that matched her apparent move to the area. What I choose to do with that understanding is my own business. My mother-in-law and I have not spoken since the mediation. My husband sees her occasionally. Family dinners, his sister's birthday. I don't go. That's a decision we've made together, and it's not forever. Or maybe it is, but right now, it's what we have. The Hamilton unit earns about $3,200 a month in rent. It goes into a joint account that we actually look at together now, that we actually talk about. My husband has become, in the past year, a more honest person to be married to. I don't know if that's because of what happened or in spite of it. I try not to need to know. Last spring, I went back to the notary's office on that quiet Burlington street for something entirely unrelated, a refinancing. Mr. Arsenault was at the front desk when I came in. He recognized me immediately. He didn't say anything about what had happened. He just nodded in the way that means, "I'm glad you're here. I'm glad things worked out." Then he offered me a glass of water and got on with the paperwork. I thought about him the whole drive home, about how he had risked something real to hand me 4 words on a sticky note. He didn't know me. He didn't know how it would go. He just recognized something that wasn't right and decided he couldn't sit quietly across from it. I keep that note in the top drawer of my desk. The handwriting is very careful, like he thought about each letter before he wrote it. There is a version of that day where I sign everything, where I drive my mother-in-law home afterward and feel vaguely unsettled for a while and then let it fade, where I tell myself it's complicated and I'm not an expert and probably it's fine. I know that version of myself. I've been her before. I'm not her anymore.